come out until it gets to an equilibrium between at that pressure and what CO2 is dissolved in the liquid. Alright. And the opposite is true as well. If you keep the pressure the same and you change the temperature, the same thing happens. So if the pressure is the same and you increase the temperature, the CO2 solubility decreases and it actually comes out of solution. And if you cool it down, you can dissolve more CO2 into it. Alright, so pressure and temperature are the important aspects of carbonating a beverage. Let's go to the next slide. And basically, guys, you've seen this equilibrium chart. I've just cut a small piece out of it. And I just want to show you basically what the equilibrium chart says is that at a specific temperature, so if you say, let's say at 3.9 degrees Celsius, alright, and at 0.83 bars of pressure, if that liquid is in equilibrium, you will have 2.52 volumes of CO2 dissolved in it, if it's in equilibrium. Alright? And that's how you read this chart. It's not to say, you say they're 3.9 degrees and 3.8. If you change the pressure on your keg to 3. What is it now? 0.9. If you change it to 3.9, so if you change it to 0.83, there we go. The thing is carbonated. Now you still need to dissolve that liquid in there. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But that's how you read this equilibrium chart. You guys would have seen it. It's normally got like a red section on it as well. And generally what they say, this is the kind of lager ale kind of range down, that's the grey and the green section. So if you're dissolving your keg, you can actually then use this chart to determine how stable or what the concentration is in there. Yes?
So this is what goes with a lot of people challenges when they're keeping their cakes in the refrigerator.
100%.
Like pure CO2. Taking 2 bars and it just gets
Yeah. So I'm going to talk specifically about that. So we'll go to the next slide. So how's this useful? How does it help knowing what this chart tells you, that pressure and temperature? So I'm the home brewer. I'm carving my keg at the moment. Naturally, beer carries excrementation about 1 to 1.2 volumes of CO2. So even at atmospheric pressure, CO2 can dissolve roughly 1 to 1.2 volumes in a liquid. So when you take it out of your fermenter, out of your plastic fermenter, whatever it is, generally about roughly 1 volumes of CO2 in that liquid already. So if you want to bring it up to about 2.5 volumes. In this case, we said the keg is at 6 degrees Celsius. Alright? So it's down here. And I want roughly about 2.52, about 2.5 volumes of CO2. I need to carb, it'll be in equilibrium at basically 1 bar. Alright? So, you take your keg, you turn it on the side, and you put the CO2, you can either put it as top pressure on your keg or through the liquid sphere, but then you put it on a longer turn valve on that point. And you set it to 1 bar and you shake. You can shake for 3-4 days at a go. If there's only 0.97 bar pressure, 1 bar pressure, that's the only amount of CO2 you'll dissolve in that liquid at 6 degrees Celsius. Alright, you're not going to dissolve more, it's not going to, this is just not how it works. You might dissolve a little bit more, but as soon as you stop, it goes back into equilibrium and it will go back down to at 6.1 degrees and at 1 bar pressure it will be about 2.5. Alright, so when you are carving at home, resist the urge to go 2.5 bar shake. Alright, just put it on at 1 bar. Alright, and I find that roughly it's about 300 movements, 300 shakes. Alright, and then you cannot get the CO2 going through the liquid port into the keg anymore. And then typically what I do is I put it up to 1.2 bar, just stop pressure and put it in the fridge. Then, after about 24 hours, you put the pressure gauge on your keg. And if it's In equilibrium, it'll be roughly 1 bar. It will still read 1 bar. If it reads lower, it means you were not at equilibrium. So typically, if I do this, I put mine at 1 bar, I find the next day, if I go and check the pressure, I'm between 0.8 and 0.9, which means I'll be roughly 2.3 to 2.4 volumes, which is perfect for what I need to do. All right. So that's how you use this chart to give you indications how to carbonate your keg. This is not an instant thing, all right? So these charts, you're not going to shake 5 shakes and there it's carbonated in that. All right. So unfortunately, these things take a while. So if you're working in a brewery and you've done spunding and now you're going to transfer from fermenter to BBT, you're literally talking about a 2-day process if you're using this. If you don't have a Zamnagel or one of these Halfman CO2 meters in there, right? If you want to know how it's going to settle, the best thing is carb everything if you want, close everything off, so you know tomorrow morning when you walk in what's the temperature, and you go read the pressure on the gauge, preferably a nice big gauge, and then you go see, okay, this is where my CO2 is. Then you need to release either some CO2 or add a little bit more in if you want to bring up the carbonation. Let's go to the next slide. Right, so here's Bruce's question. That same beer that I carved now at 6 degrees and at 1 bar, I put it in my keezer, I tap some glorious beer, it's pouring perfectly, man. I've got 1.4 bar top pressure, but it is Sunday afternoon. I have a couple of beers and I take an early evening and I get the gas on. But what happens is only on Friday next week do I get back to it and it's like, now I'm going to pour a beer. First pour that I do, total chaos. It's just foam and it's overcarbonated. What the hell changed? Alright? So now 5 days later, in the keezer, the temperature of the keg has gone down to 1.7. I've had 1.4 bar top pressure on it. Why is it going so wild? So if you go, the reason is that bloody dude, Henry. Alright? He's the reason why. So if you go to the next slide every week. Alright? So when you carved it at 1 bar, alright, you were at 2.52. Now, 5 days later, what's happened is you had 1.7 degrees Celsius and at 1.4 bar that you've added on. Your new carbonation is now 3.52.
That's fine.
You're basically serving Coca-Cola. Alright? That's the carbonation of Coca-Cola. It's about 3.5 to 3.8 volume. And that's what's happened to your beer. Alright? Simple Henry's law, like temperature and pressure. So what can you do about that? You go to the next slide? Yes, so I've got a little tool. It's a coupler. There's your liquid port, you can close it off. There's no non-return valve in here. And this is just a basic air pressure gauge and then a little vent valve that you can do. I put it, once I've served beer, because I like to serve beer at kind of 2 bar, 2.5 bar top pressure. Serve my beer, I have no problems, and when I'm done and I'm going to put the keg away, the first thing I do is I bring it back down to 1 bar, because I know that's where the CO2 will be perfect going forward. Alright, so I bring it back to, remember that point where we said 2.52 is at 1 bar? I just drop the pressure, the top pressure of the keg. And then you can put it back in the fridge until next week when you want to use it. You put your top pressure back on at 2.5 bar and you serve it, off you go. And you will not have this issue. Alright. So, if you're going to put it in your keezer and you're going to leave it at very cold temperatures and at a high serving pressure, you will pick up CO2. Alright? And if we go to the next slide.
A lot of gauges. Actually, like when it gets down below 1 bar, you cannot even read. Like
that's the problem.
We should have more accurate gauges.
Yeah.
You do, but they're expensive.
Yeah. So as soon as you go, and that's unfortunately, spunding valves typically are very, got a big dial, so that you can actually control and carbonate the beer correctly.
Yes.
On a meter.
gauges.
Yeah, but I go roughly, if it's now 0.8 or 1 bar, it's really not going to make a big difference for my, if it's 2.3 or 2.6 serving, while in volumes, that's fine by me. So that's not a problem. So, now, you've all been here, I've heard many others complain about this. Your cake pours perfectly at home, but now at the summer festival it does not. Alright? And like this, I can see Alex there with jugs and collecting foam, and, it's like apologizing to the long queue in front of him. I'm sorry. I've also seen some craft brewers do exactly the same thing at events as well. So when you left home, the cake was at 4 degrees Celsius, alright? But now when you try and serve it, what's happening is you're getting bubble breakup in the line. And the reason for that is temperature and pressure.
Yep.
The solubility of the CO2 has actually changed. So if you go to the next slide, there's one thing I need to just explain. So if you look at a cake setup, this is not very clear, but there's actually a line here. You have your gas point, you have your regulator, and this point there's a secondary regulator, but generally most of us just go straight into the cake. And from here, this is a fault detector, but most homebrewers don't have one. You go straight out here in the line to your icebox or electric chiller, and then up here into your dispenser in your tap. All right. So why are you pouring foam from the tap there? What you need to keep in mind is Henry's laws are working. All right, when you're pouring beer, physics, beer. Draft beer is pure physics. So when somebody ever told you at school, we're going to use this shit again, what's pouring beer? Alright? This is important. Alright? So when you kids say, I'm never going to use this again, you show them this and say, yes, physics in action, my boy. There it is. Alright? So what's happening is, when you come out of the cake, out of the liquid port, and you're going down this line, what's happening is, yes, the cake might have been 4 degrees when you left home, but now it's sitting at 10 degrees. And when it goes into this line, the temperature changes as well. So you actually get an increase in temperature. And remember Henry's law says, when the temperature increases, the CO2 solubility goes down, which means you get CO2 coming out. Now, the other thing you don't think about is that every type of line has got a pressure drop that happens. The longer the line, the bigger the pressure drop. So if you increase the temperature and you decrease the pressure coming out here, because remember you're putting a certain amount of pressure on here, but that pressure diminishes all the way down here. Henry's law says temperature or pressure changes, depending if it's going up or down, changes solubility of CO2. So keep that in mind. Then you get to your chiller. What happens here? Temperature goes down, which is good. When temperature goes down, means solubility CO2 goes up. So, if you can get the beer out of the cake, into this line, into here, without gas breaking out here because you've exceeded the temperature and pressure requirements for that CO2, this temperature drop here will be sharp. That'll increase the solubility. But, I'll be with you now, Lee. Generally in these things, there's a long coil that needs to be chilled. And any long piece of pipe results in a pressure drop again. So even though you're dropping temperature, you're also dropping pressure. When you drop pressure, you change the solubility of the CO2. So when you select your CO2 top pressure to dispense this beer, you need to keep in mind, whatever this temperature is coming out here, alright? You need to ensure that with this pressure drop, taking into consideration that the pressure, when it hits here, whatever that pressure is, must be higher than what's required for the CO2 to stay in solution. Otherwise, you're going to get breakup somewhere along the line. And if you get bubbles in your draft system, anywhere, alright, you can stand on your head, it will foam when it comes out of that tap. Alright? So, first thing is, when you get foam coming out, the first place you have a look is there bubbles in my line? And if there is, it means your pressure is not high enough. It's counterintuitive. You always I've always seen the guys they drop the pressure. No, it's going rough, and drop the pressure. And what are you doing? You're making it worse because you're dropping the pressure required to keep the CO2 in solution. So, whenever I'm at an event and I need to serve something, I serve a 2.5 bar.
Yep.
All right. Don't waste your time with, oh, I'm going to, be careful of CO2 pickup. You're going to be serving 2-3 kegs, man. All right. And then if you have a half a keg left over that you're going to take home, then depressurize it back down to 1 bar or 0.8 bar or whatever you want to do. But keep this in mind when you're setting up your draft system. Of course, you can get an obstruction in the line somewhere that actually aggravates, you don't get laminar flow down the line, and you can get CO2 breakout from that. Right? So if you don't clean your lines properly, or you've got
hot material.
or hot material or something like that, you need to clean. Obviously, that is important as well. You don't want to agitate it. Lee, you had a question as well.
Yeah, sorry. So if you get breakout between your keg and the chalk plate, can you make the chalk plate cold enough that it reabsorbs, or is it just not enough time?
No, there's not enough time, man. Once the bubbles are there, you are screwed. The only way to do it then is increase the pressure, alright, and run out whatever is here until you get to that point.
So no bubbles into your chalk plate, basically.
No bubbles into the chalk plate. If you've got bubbles going to your chalk plate, that's it. It's going to foam.
Okay.
Done.
Johnny, one you haven't mentioned is flow control in the tap.
Okay, so there's a back pressure flow control. Most taps have here. For some odd reason, American taps don't have flow control. You can see how maple beers, it's quite big heads and stuff on it. But that allows you to run the keg at 2.5 bar and then drop the pressure that needs to come out of this tap. Because this unit in here actually make sure you get nice laminar flow, you don't have breakout until it gets out of the spout in that point. And that's what the back pressure control allows you to do. It allows you to compensate for whatever pressure you're putting on top of the keg down that side.
Because you have the flow control 2.5 bar.
Yeah, no. You've got to have flow control taps. If you've got taps, I've seen some people sell online, taps with no flow controls on the side. But don't waste your time. Don't waste your money. You can put flow controls on.
If you do, you've actually got to get a compensator which you put on the tap, on the bottom, on the tube.
Yeah, so you've got to actually put an inline compensator for that. So if you buy a tap, don't waste your money on one that doesn't have a compensator on the side. All right. So if you see something special in it, don't buy it. Compensate tap. All right. Next slide. All right. I think I actually spoke about. What was it?
Donnie, I just want to say the previous slide, at Capital we've got 36 taps.
Yeah.
And on Friday night, our spillage in the end is 2 liters. And what Donnie is talking about there, it's an art form.
Yeah.
It's like a science.
But you're running Fox as well.
It's not that you do
It's
one.
physics.
It's not one set that works forever. It's every fucking day you're in there.
Yeah.
And you're fixing or you're calibrating, you counter this or there, and it's crazy.
I just want to
Johan?
No, so it's exactly that. I mean, I think for you guys,
It's like an ecosystem of its own.
just every day you could compensate. So let's say I need the minimum pressure just to keep the CO2 in solution, and say my keg is pressurized at 1.7 and running 0.7 bar, and I only need, let's say, 0.9 bar to actually get it through without foaming. If you put that 0.9 on for day 1, by tomorrow it's actually absorbed a bit of CO2. You actually need to increase the dispensing pressure again tomorrow, and then it becomes a freaking evil cycle. Every time you increase it, it dissolves more and more and more until it gets to the point where it's just freaking fuzzy. You get to 3 volumes of bloody CO2, especially slow moving taps.
No, you get days where the system is throwing a tantrum, and then you realize that your fridge temperature changed. And it's like a whole freaking, and it's a whole, and you full,
Exactly. That's the time when it happens. Right? So that's the time when it happens. So just
That's the game,
so